Okay, so let's talk about intermittent fasting. You see it everywhere, right? It's one of the biggest trends out there. But what's actually going on inside your body when you fast? Today, we're going to get past all the hype and really break down the science of it, from your metabolism all the way down to what's happening in your cells. Just think about how most of us eat: breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe a few snacks thrown in. This idea of constantly grazing is, well, it's actually pretty new. For almost all of human history, food wasn't a guarantee. And our bodies evolved these incredibly powerful, ancient ways to not just get by, but to actually thrive when there wasn't food around. And that's really the key to what we're talking about today. So, what is intermittent fasting really? Well, it isn't one specific diet. Think of it more like an umbrella term for a bunch of different eating schedules. The main takeaway, the big idea, is that it's less about obsessing over what you're eating and much more about focusing on when you're eating. You're creating intentional windows of time for your body to be in a fasted state. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll get into the why, the whole evolutionary reason this makes sense. Then we'll dig into the how by unpacking the core science, this thing called the metabolic switch, and what's going on with your cells. After that, we'll see what the actual research says about the benefits, and we'll wrap up with some really important context because, it's not a magic bullet. So, fasting is about way more than just giving your stomach a break. It really seems to tap into something much, much deeper. Our bodies have what scientists call evolutionarily conserved adaptive cellular responses. I know, it's a mouthful, but it basically just means we have these ancient survival programs built right into our DNA, designed for times when food was scarce. In our world of constant food, these incredibly powerful protective pathways often just lie dormant, completely unused. Okay, so how do we wake up those dormant pathways? It all comes down to this one central mechanism, this really cool idea called the metabolic switch. This is literally the moment your body changes its mind about what it's using for energy. Here's how it plays out. For the first several hours after you eat, no surprise, your body's running on glucose from that meal. But after about 10 to 14 hours with no food, the glucose you have stored in your liver, it's called glycogen, it runs out. And that is the trigger. Your body says, okay, time for plan B, and it flips the switch. It starts breaking down fat into fatty acids and producing something called ketones, which become a major fuel source for your body, and especially for your brain. And this contrast right here is where all the magic happens. On one hand, you've got the fed state. Insulin is high and your body is in full-on growth and storage mode. But when you fast, insulin levels plummet and the body's entire mission changes. It's no longer about storing energy. It enters this incredible repair and recycle mode. And that big shift from growth to repair is where some of the most profound things start to happen. So let's zoom way, way in and see what's going on at the microscopic level. So when your cells get the signal to go into that repair and recycle mode, they activate this really critical process with a pretty cool name: autophagy. Now, autophagy literally means self-eating. And I know that sounds a little intense, but trust me, it's an amazing thing. Think of it as your body's internal quality control system, or a cellular cleanup crew. Your cells go around, find old, damaged, junky parts like messed up proteins, and they just get rid of them. It's essential housekeeping that clears out the clutter and recycles the raw materials to build new, healthier parts. But here's the really crucial point. Autophagy isn't happening all by itself. Fasting kicks off this whole coordinated cascade of events. It ramps up your cell's resistance to stress. It boosts DNA repair. It tells your body to build new mitochondria, the power plants of your cells, and it dials down inflammation. It's a massive, system-wide shift toward resilience and repair. Okay, so we've covered the theory, the metabolic switch, the cellular cleanup crew. It all sounds pretty good, but does any of this actually translate to real-world health benefits? Let's take a look at what the research has to say. So for weight loss, is intermittent fasting some kind of magic bullet compared to just old-fashioned calorie restriction? Well, when you look at major studies like these, the answer seems to be not really. Both approaches lead to pretty similar amounts of weight loss. The real difference might just be which pattern is easier for an individual person to actually stick with long-term. However, and this is a really big however, if you only focus on the number on the scale, you are missing a huge part of the picture. The research is starting to show that some of the most important benefits of fasting are metabolic, and they're not just a side effect of losing weight. Yeah, this quote right here is a key insight. A big review looking at insulin sensitivity found that the improvements people saw from intermittent fasting were often independent of any weight they lost. This tells us that the simple act of cycling between fasting and eating has its own direct, powerful effect on our metabolism. And to put a number on it, get this. One clinical trial had healthy people do alternate day fasting for just 22 days. The result? A stunning 57% drop in their fasting insulin levels. That is a huge improvement in a key marker for metabolic health. And the benefits don't stop there. They seem to extend right up into our brains. Remember those ketones we talked about? Well, it turns out our neurons can run on them, and run on them very well. But it's more than just fuel. Fasting also stimulates the production of something called BDNF, which you can basically think of as fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps promote the growth of new neurons, strengthens the connections between them, and makes your brain tougher and more resistant to stress. Now, as incredible as all this sounds, it's really important to take a step back and remember that intermittent fasting isn't a magic fix for everything. The science is still evolving, and there are other really critical factors at play that researchers are just now starting to get a handle on. And one of the most exciting new frontiers in all of this research is the gut microbiome. The trillions of bacteria living inside your digestive system. It turns out they're paying very close attention to your eating schedule. This quote from a recent review really highlights how big of a deal this is. Scientists are now thinking that our gut bacteria might be the key middlemen, the go-betweens in the relationship between when we eat and how healthy our metabolism is. The timing of our meals literally changes who's living in our gut, and that, in turn, can affect our health. And finally, this all plugs into an even bigger biological system, our circadian rhythm. Our bodies run on a 24-hour internal clock that controls just about everything, including our metabolism. So it might be that aligning our eating window with this natural rhythm, like eating earlier in the day and fasting through the night, is crucial for getting the most out of it. Which kind of brings us full circle to this final thought. In a world where food is always available, is it possible we've accidentally silenced a fundamental part of our own biology? The science seems to suggest that by creating these intentional periods without food, we're not depriving ourselves. We might actually be re-engaging these ancient, powerful, and protective pathways for health that have been built into us all along.
So, what's the real science behind intermittent fasting? Well, today, we're breaking it all down.
Okay, think about this. Our bodies are wired for feast and famine, not constant feasting.
And because of that, an important survival switch in our cells, it pretty much never gets flipped on.
And that's the whole game right there, the metabolic switch. It's a total change in your body's fuel source.
So how does it work? Well, after about 10 hours of fasting, you've used up all your easy sugar fuel.
But here's where it gets really interesting. These two fuels, they act completely differently inside our bodies.
And that switch triggers a kind of stress response. But hey, this is the good kind of stress.
Yeah, think of it like spring cleaning for your cells. They start to repair, protect, and tidy up. A huge part of this is something called autophagy, basically a recycling program that constant eating shuts down.
So, what does all this cellular cleanup actually do? Well, let's start with the brain.
Turns out there's a pretty strong link between eating too much, too often, and certain brain diseases.
But fasting seems to fight back. It ramps up a protein that's basically Miracle-Gro for your brain.
And it's not just your brain. Fasting gives your gut microbiome a total makeover too.
You actually start to grow more of the good gut bacteria, the kind linked to better overall health.
Okay, so the science sounds great in theory, but what about real-world results in actual people?
Well, check this out. One trial found fasting slashed insulin resistance way more than just cutting calories.
And it's not a fluke. Big picture studies show the same powerful effect, even without weight loss.
So the science looks really promising for sure, but we're still learning a lot.
Which all leads to one massive question. Maybe when we eat is just as important as what we eat.